Thanks. Thanks a lot. Let's make a start. Okay, thanks. My name is John McDonnell. I'm the delegate from Hayes and Harlington. Welcome to everybody, and thanks for coming along. And I just want to say thanks to TWT, The World Transformed, Claim the Future, and also the Democracy Collaborative, who've sponsored tonight's event and organised it and worked incredibly hard. All the volunteers have just been absolutely terrific. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a discussion with Bernie Sanders. We're going to ask Bernie just to outline how he sees the current situation, and then we'll have the opportunity of a discussion and a few questions, if that's okay with everyone. All right? We're a democracy still, even though there's no, they try to undermine it today. That's okay, isn't it? Okay. All right. So what I'd like to do now is welcome Bernie Sanders, who, as you know, over his lifetime has devoted himself to, in some of the most difficult circumstances, the development of socialist ideas, both when he was mayor back in Vermont, in Burlington, and then throughout his career in Congress, and now as the ranking Democrat in the House. Now, for a number of you, like me, we knew there was this murmur that a socialist existed in America. And then we knew the name Bernie Sanders. And then, as a result of the work that he did over the years, he created a wave. And a wave developed, a wave of socialist ideas and practice. New generations came onto the scene. And now, I believe, are actually dictating a large amount of the political agenda in America as a result of the work that he inspired. So I'm hoping the technology is working, and I'm hoping that Bernie will be joining us now. If he isn't, I'm going to break out in song.
And all of those.
Throughout COVID, I've been taking trombone lessons. And unfortunately, I never brought it. No, fortunately for you, I never brought it with me. So I'm looking at our tech people. We're streaming back down in the tent as well.
Yeah, we're ready to go. You didn't run video, so.
Here it comes. Bernie will be a large figure above my head.
Hello, everybody. Well, John, let me thank you and everyone in the Labor Party for helping to put together this discussion. Live stream is a real powerful tool, and it's one that we should be using more often, not only between the UK and the US, but between progressives and democratic socialists all over the world. Let me just say a few words about what's going on here in the United States right now, some of the successes that we've had in recent years and some of the obstacles that are currently before us. The good news, I think, is that it is fair to say that the progressive movement in the United States in the last 5-6 years has transformed the Democratic Party. And we did that by going out to the people, to working people and young people all across this country, and talking about the real issues that they are dealing with. And we had the courage to take on the big money interests, which have so much influence over the economic and political life of what goes on here in the United States. And people began to see and ask themselves, why is it that we continue to have massive levels of income and wealth inequality? Now, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the United States, you got two people owning more wealth than the bottom 40%. Top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 91%. Meanwhile, half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. And you know what? Nobody thinks that's right or it makes sense. We are in the United States, and you're way ahead of us in the UK. We're the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people as a human right. I know you got problems with the NHS, but we are losing some 60,000 Americans every year who cannot get to a doctor on time. We pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. In America, the richest country on earth, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. We got millions of young people who have left college who are deeply in debt, and you got hundreds of thousands of bright young people who cannot afford to go to college. 2 blocks from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., you have an encampment of homeless people. 600,000 Americans are homeless. We are the only major country on earth not to have paid family and medical leave. There are women in the United States, low-income workers, give birth, they are back at work a week later because there is no income coming in to sustain them or their babies. And then on top of all of that, whether it's the UK, China, or the United States, we're facing the existential threat of climate change. And we put that issue on the table, and we did something very radical. We actually listened to the scientists who tell us that if we don't get our act together, within the next 4 or 5 years, there will be irreparable damage done to the United States and to countries all over the world. That's the reality. So we have been successful in, I think, transforming the ideology of the Democratic Party, but we've also done something maybe even more important. And that is we have brought millions of young people who in this country historically really were not active in politics. Don't know how it is in the UK. But in this country, young people really never saw the relevance of politics. We brought many of them into the political process, and I think they played a very significant role in electing Biden and giving us control, although it's a very modest control over the House and the Senate here. So young people are beginning to become activated. So that's kind of what we have accomplished. During the midst of the terrible pandemic that we are all facing, the Biden administration and members of the United States Congress, Democrats, demanded a bold action to deal with the economic downturn and the pandemic. And what we were successful in doing, among other things, is pass the American Rescue Plan, which extended unemployment, which provided direct payments to working people, overwhelming majority of Americans, which provided $300 a month to working parents. And John, you know what that did? That lowered childhood poverty in the United States by over 50%. And we also put money, large sums of money, into making sure that we got vaccines into the arms of people with some success. The American Rescue Plan was very, very effective. And then more recently, what the president said, what I said, and what others said, look, now is the time to restore faith in American democracy. And I know we're going to talk about this, because all over the world, there are working people who say, you know what? My income is going down. My kids are going to have a lower standard of living than I do. Does anybody pay attention to my needs? Why should I listen to the bullshit of politicians? They're not going to do anything anyhow. I'm giving up. I'm not voting. Or worse, I will listen to the demagogues who are telling me that the real problem has to do with immigration, or that I need to hate somebody because of the color of their skin. So what we have said, and the president deserves a lot of credit for that, let us take a hard look at the structural problems that working class families have faced in America way before Trump, for decades. And let's begin to address it. So right now, as some of you may know, we're working on 2 pieces of legislation. One is a so-called bipartisan piece of legislation, which invests in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems, which in the United States is really in bad shape. The more important provision, one that I have worked on, is a $3.5 trillion bill, which begins to deal with the unmet needs that working families are facing. That's dealing with the needs of our children in terms of childcare, in terms of childhood poverty. It's in terms of starting to make, doesn't go as far as I would like, 2 years of college, what we call community college, tuition free. It is ending the absurdity of the United States being the only major country not to have paid family and medical leave. It is expanding healthcare. It is investing hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel. And in the process of doing all of these things and more, we're going to create millions of good paying, often union jobs. So what we are finally saying to the American people, we're going to be working for you, not just for wealthy campaign contributors and the 1%. And that's where we are right now. Now, at this moment, we don't have a parliamentary system. We have 50 senators, 50 Democratic members of the Democratic caucus in the Senate, 50 Republicans. So it's a tie. And we're trying to do all of this without one vote to spare. The vice president comes in and casts the deciding vote. And we have, frankly, some conservative Democrats who are slowing us up big time. But that is where we are right now. And I think when we do that, and when we go forward, it is not just addressing the long neglected problems of working people. It is an effort to tell people that democracy can work for working people. And I worry very, very much. You know, we talk about climate, we talk about COVID. One of the international issues that we have got to address is the declining support for democracy and the growth of authoritarian movements all across the world. And I think a lot of that has to do with people losing faith that government is listening to their pain. So with that, let me thank you again, John, Jeremy Corbyn, and all of my friends in the UK for helping to organize this event.
Bernie, thanks for that. Terrific. I'm not sure if you can hear that applause or see the crowd at all, Bernie, but the applause is terrific. We're also streaming this outside in another tent with, I think, about 400 people there as well. And as you say, the audience here, apart from old fellas like me, mostly young. And it's the new generation that has come forward to take on the baton for the next struggles. We want to ask you a few questions because there's a lot of similarities between the current position, but there's one similar challenge as well. And I want to know how you've overcome it. When Biden was elected, I believe he's elected on the basis of the inspiration that you and the left, the progressives within the Democrats, were able to provide America. But you've established a relationship with what we'd describe as a centrist leader, but a relationship which has enabled him to adopt a radical program. In fact, a huge program if you can get the legislation through. I want to let you into a small secret. We have a centrist leader as well. But we're having problems in ensuring we have a working relationship from the left with that new leadership. But you've achieved that. How's that been done?
Well, it's done, I think, because of a couple of factors. Joe Biden is a creature of the Senate. He loved the Senate. He has been in the Senate, I think, something like 36 years. So I got to know Joe and obviously ran against them in the Democratic nomination. And the truth of the matter is, you're quite right. His history has been one of being a moderate centrist, but he is a very, very decent human being. I mean, I know him quite well, and I say that without hesitation. He's a good human being, and he does not like to see suffering or racism or sexism around him. To his credit, and it took, and I think he deserves enormous credit for that, he looked around him and he saw the kind of movement that we helped develop. That's number one. And the excitement of young people in wanting transformative change. And number two, he looked around him and saw the short-term and long-term crises facing the American people. Now, what usually goes on in the United States in our politics is people nibble around the edges. Well, we'll raise education by 2%, and we'll cut healthcare by 3%, and we'll put some money here. And Biden, to his credit, said, look, this is absurd. You got billionaires in the United States, billionaires, not paying a nickel in federal income tax. Same with large profitable corporations. Biden is no fool. He looked at the climate crisis. How do we, as responsible human beings, if we are concerned and love our kids and our grandchildren, how do we not go forward aggressively in transforming our energy system? And Biden understands that. So we have disagreements. I'm not here to tell you Biden's views are not mine on healthcare. He's still wedded to the for-profit health insurance industry, et cetera, et cetera. We have differences of opinion. But to his credit, he was prepared, John, to think big, not small. And he understood that the only way we bring people into the political process is by talking about the pain that they are now experiencing. We cannot continue to ignore that.
You mentioned democracy earlier. I think we, like many Americans, lived in fear of the potential of Trump, the Trump administration, and what it could do, not just domestically in America, but globally as well. Two questions on that, really. How were you able to overcome Trump, particularly given the media that you have, and it's the same here, but also how do you prevent his return? Because we believe we're worried about democracy across the world and the way in which there's the rise of proto-fascism in different countries as well. But also, if America's democracy is weak, it sends a message across the globe.
John, that is exactly right. And those are issues that keep me up very, very late at night. We defeated Trump, and I tell you, I don't know that I've ever worked so hard in my life to make sure that Trump was not reelected. Because for a lot of reasons, for a wide variety of reasons, people were disgusted with his behavior, his response to COVID, ignoring what the scientists were telling us, his racism, his sexism, his homophobia, his xenophobia, his lying. Man is a pathological liar. And for even some Republicans, it became embarrassing to acknowledge supporting him. But let's be clear on this, John. Let's not hide the truth. If my memory is correct, I mean, the good news is Biden beat Trump, I think it was 7 or 8 million votes. That's a lot. On the other hand, Trump got far more votes in 2020 than he got in 2016. In other words, all over this country, and especially in some of the lowest income, white, working class communities, his vote went up. His vote went up. And we have to ask ourselves how it could be that people who are seeing a decline in their standard of living don't have any health care, they can't send their kids to college, they're working for starvation wages. Why did they vote for Donald Trump? And they did. To answer the second part of your question, how do we prevent Trump's reelection or somebody like him or even worse? It is precisely what this legislation is about. It is saying to the American people, you have a choice. You can respond to a demagogue who wants you to hate your neighbor because of the color of her skin, or to hate somebody who has speaks a different language, or you can begin to address the real problems. Do you want healthcare as a human right? Yeah, I do. Do you think that 2 people should own more wealth than the bottom 40%? No, that's crazy. Do you think that we should address climate and create millions of jobs? Yeah, we should. Should we raise the minimum wage to a living wage? Yeah, we should. Should we build housing? Yes, we should. So all of the issues that we are bringing forth are popular issues for working families. They are. And the struggle now is how we bring people together around a progressive agenda, or how we allow Trump to divide us up on his racism and sexism and xenophobia. That is the struggle. And I will be the first to tell you, I don't think we are, thank God that Biden won, but I don't think we are doing anywhere near enough in understanding why working class people, white working class people, are turning toward this right-wing extremism. We are not doing enough to understand that. We are not doing enough to develop policies which will prevent, which will put a stop to that. So we got a lot of work on the table.
We have our own Trump here at the moment in Boris Johnson. He might come across as something different, a joke, a clown, or anything like that. But he's dangerous, and he has the same similarities. He has we have to use certain language in Parliament, so you can't call a person a liar, and if you do, you get thrown out. So we use euphemisms like he has a passing relationship with the truth, when in effect he is a liar. But he's there to serve a purpose, and in our country, he's there to serve a purpose on behalf of finance capital and the City of London, and the way in which it's become, I suppose, the funnel for not just money laundering, but also for tax avoidance, and the way in which also it's been used in a rapacious way to exploit the global south in particular. Now, the development of our policies around that was, of course, a taxation policy on the City of London and also on the wealth and the corporations, etc. But we need international action to do that effectively. What's the discussion like in America at the moment about how we can tackle finance capital, the finance capital flows, the way in which they avoid taxes, the way in which they have become, as I said, a funnel, certainly from the city, maybe from New York, for money laundering as well, particularly for the money, the ill-gained gains of oligarchs across the world?
I'm happy to tell you that there is some discussion, because what we understand is that it is not only the United States government which is losing probably trillions of dollars every year in tax revenue, but it is countries all over the world. So you have the insane situation where in the Cayman Islands and in Bermuda and in Luxembourg, there are countries all over the world where people are able to dump their fortunes and not pay any taxes and do it without disclosure. We remember the Panama Papers of a couple of years ago that made that quite clear. So this, John, there are a number of areas, and that's why progressives all over the world are going to have to start talking, where we're going to have to work together. And taking on corporate interests in the billionaire class and telling them that they are going to have to pay their fair share of taxes. They cannot dump their fortunes into tax havens around the world is an absolute imperative. But there are other issues out there as well. We are going to have to work very aggressively in making sure that all people around the world get the vaccines that they need if we're going to deal from a human point of view, and just even our own well-being. We're going to have to make sure that people get vaccinated, and we have to prepare for the next pandemic, which will surely come. And I should tell you that we are investing many billions of dollars in our government agencies, research agencies, to try to figure out how we can move more rapidly in the future. And then we have the absolute need for global cooperation in terms of climate. I mean, the United States could do everything that I would like to see. We can't do it alone. You're going to have to do it. China, which is the largest emitter in the world, And one of the issues that I am very worried about is here in the United States, there is a growing anti-Chinese movement trying to create a Cold War with China. Look, we all agree that on human rights, China has been a disaster in many respects, and we have to deal with that. But a Cold War between the US and China or the West is not what we need at this time. We're going to have to work together on climate and in so many other areas.
Just on the climate program you put forward, for the money that you're putting up, which is gigantic sums, immeasurable in terms of what's gone on in the past, what sort of conditionality are you putting on this money in terms of the way in which it's invested, the way in which, as you say, for example, you mentioned making sure that there are good jobs and they're well paid and they're trade unionized jobs. What sort of conditionality are you, not just with regard to government money, but what are you thinking about those private corporations and the regulation of those with regard to climate?
We are doing the best that we can, and needless to say, as I mentioned earlier, we have some conservatives in the caucus who are resisting some of what we're trying to do. But basically, there is a lot of conditionality. And that says that if you get any government money, you're going to pay people a living wage. You're going to make it easier for workers to form unions. Let me give you one example. And we are thinking of many, many hundreds of billions of dollars to move the United States away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. Let me give you one example of something that I am personally very excited about. It wasn't my idea. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, my colleague Ed Markey, and others kind of developed this. It's what we call a civilian climate corps. And what that would do is put, if I have anything to say about it, $30 billion into providing good jobs, good paying jobs, and educational benefits for young people who are then going to go out and help us transform our energy system. And I think that could be inspirational for so many of these young people who feel passionately about the need to tackle climate change. So that's just one area. We are talking about investing tens and tens of billions in energy efficiency. Many of our buildings are old, waste an enormous amount of energy. We are investing in transforming our transportation system away from fossil fuel to electric vehicles. We are talking about generating electricity now, not through fossil fuels, but through sustainable energy. Massive investments in wind and solar, et cetera. So this is what we are trying to do right now, would be, I think, by far, the largest investment in combating climate change in the history of the world.
We have a special responsibility in the UK with regard to the global south because we were a colonialist nation. We built an empire on the backs of exploitation of our colonies. And at the moment, there's a debate that we're now having about our responsibility in the future. And we're talking about the need for reparations, the way in which we can maybe try and go some way towards making up for the pain and suffering and damage that we caused to the global south. And that will require cancellation of debt, transfer of technology, particularly green technology, to enable us to tackle climate change together across the globe, global south as well as the developed nations. But in addition to that, we're arguing for the reform of the international bodies as well, the World Bank, the IMF, who've been exploitative as the development of neocolonialism over the years as well, including the UN. What sort of debate is happening in the US at the moment around those issues?
Well, I think maybe not of the same nature as you are undergoing, but I think the predominant understanding is that the world is becoming smaller and smaller. Whether it is COVID, whether it is climate, whether it is tax avoidance by large corporations, we are in this together. And I think there is a full understanding that at a time when the major industrialized countries for decades have been filling the air with carbon, that you're not going to penalize and come down heavy on developing countries which are experiencing mass poverty. So there is an obligation to work together to help make the developing world greener, but not at any expense of their standard of living. So I think that's kind of where we are at.
One of the things that inspired people across the globe was the Black Lives Matter movement that commenced in America as a result of tragic individual cases, but that developed into analysis of racism, and in our own country, imperialism made us look at our past as well, and the role of slavery that this country participated in. Where is that going now in America? Because here there is still a drive to challenge forms of racism. It's entered into, I think, a real debate and discussion. And it is a challenging movement. It's young people who just won't take it anymore. But that inspiration came from America. Is the momentum still there within the struggle within America?
It is. But again, because frankly, the conservatives we have within the Democratic caucus, it is very difficult to do what has to be done. So we're talking about several things. Ever since the inception of the cell phone, where you can now take a video, what we have seen in the United States, and these images have gone all over the world, is the murder of often young African-American men and others by police. And that's what George Floyd situation is about. As you have indicated, people all across our country, especially young people, are saying this is not acceptable. We cannot continue. And I got to tell you, as a presidential candidate, you talk to people, and when you're white, you don't quite get it. But in black neighborhoods, I mean, there is a fear. A mom letting her, 16-year-old boy walk the streets, there's a real fear of what might happen to that kid. So we are working hard in police department reform, trying to make, and in our country, that is, police departments are run locally by municipalities, not by the federal government. But in a variety of ways, through sticks and carrots, we're trying to combat racism in local police departments and provide police officers with the training that they need. Our police officers often get a lot of training on how to shoot their guns. They don't get the training they need on how to break up or deal with somebody who has a mental illness, or to deal with people who are acting unruly. And they resort sometimes to guns before other means are utilized. So we are dealing with that. And then at the same time, John, there is another problem that is equally serious, is that in Republican states all over this country, there is a blatant effort to build on Trump's lie. And you know what Trump's big lie was? That he won the election. It was stolen from him. And sadly, there are millions of people who believe that. And what you have is in states like Georgia, where for the first time we won 2 Senate seats that gave us control over the Senate, in Texas, and in many other states, what Republican governors and legislatures are blatantly doing is passing legislation to make it harder for people of color, young people, people with disabilities to participate in the political process. And this is a real attack on the foundations of American democracy. And we're trying to address that in Congress right now. We have 0 Republican support. I think one of the points that I want to make, I've talked about my conservative Democratic colleagues, the Republican Party here has moved from what you and I would refer, 20, 30 years ago to a center-right party. So conservatives in democracies usually were center-right to right-wing extremism. So these are guys now who in some cases, they question the usefulness of masks. They're ambiguous about vaccines. They don't believe in climate. They're trying to deny people the right to vote. They are perpetuating the big lie that Trump won the election. So this is something that everybody in UK and elsewhere should be aware of. Republican Party has moved very far to the right, with a few exceptions.
I want to talk about community wealth building, but before I do, I want to reminisce a minute, because I was a councillor on the Greater London Council in the 1980s, and I was the chair of finance and deputy leader. And we heard about this socialist banging the table against developers far off in Burlington, Vermont. Just explain what then happened, because I think people need to know this story, Bernie, because the apartment block, it was, what was it, Northgate, I was trying to remember the name, Northgate Apartments, became famous, and actually it inspired us in terms of the GLC as well, of how to deal with developers. You don't stroke them, you use the Bernie Sanders treatment of banging the table. Just explain that to people, what happened.
Well, when I came into office in 1981, and I won by all of 10 votes after a recount, the city had been run for many years by conservative Democrats. And what we did, John, and you know, this is a lesson I have never forgotten, and we are applying it right now. We went to the people, and we said to the people, what do you want us to do on housing? What do you want us to do with young people? What should we do? We have no teenagers are hanging out on the streets. Should we provide better opportunities to them? What do you want us to do with public housing? What do you want us to do with environmental issues? What do you want us to do in terms of tax policy? And we established neighborhood planning assemblies, which brought people into the political process. When I was mayor, before that, city council meetings were the most boring meetings in the world. You know, Fluck, 3 people might show up and fall asleep. When I was mayor, hundreds of people showed up. And we dealt with a whole lot of issues. And not only did we develop the community land trust, which is, I think, what you're referring to, concept, in saying that if you want perpetually affordable housing, you have to allow people to own, you know, their housing, and when they sell it, it stays affordable. We did just many, many other things. And what I'm extremely proud of and have not forgotten, we have elections in Burlington, had them every 2 years. When I ran for re-election, we almost doubled the voter turnout from what it had been. So a lot of working class people who saw results coming into their communities said, you know what, maybe I'll come out and vote and keep what we have. And I was very proud of that. But I think, and not only that, we even developed what was called our own foreign policy. We developed some exchange programs with, and that was then the Soviet Union, city with Yaroslavl. We did one with Nicaragua. And we spoke out on national issues and had debate on national issues and brought people into that discussion. So I am a very old-fashioned, I believe in democracy. And I believe that when you involve people in the political process, when you talk about the real issues impacting their lives, I think that is extremely positive and important to do.
We try to explain to developers in London, if it's good enough for Burlington, Vermont, in the belly of the beast of capitalism, it's good enough for Hackney in London, that the people own communally, the homes they live in.
Good, that's right. And by the way, what we are trying to do is get this concept of community land trust and housing land trust into the federal budget for the first time.
Our local authorities, our local councils have been under a lot of pressure for a long period of time under this Conservative government for the last 10 years, denied resources. They've had heaps of responsibilities placed upon them without the resources. So they are going through. We've described it as the Preston model because it's one town in the northwest of England whereby they're developing this concept of community wealth, where they bring all the different agencies together with the community itself, see what resources they have within that community, and then build upon it by combining the contracts of the health authority, the university, the local council, to employ locally, but also to employ at trade union rates, and to ensure that when they use contractors, that they again abide by certain basic standards of how they treat their workers and can contribute overall. And that's a model. And as I say, we've been working with the Democracy Collaborative as well to help propose those ideas and promote them as well. Just so you know as well, as under this Conservative government, you mentioned the issues around voter suppression under Trump. Just so you know, legislation is currently going through our Parliament, which again echoes some of those early stages of voter suppression, the way in which people have to turn up at polling stations with certain types of ID, and they know there are certain people within our community, older, others that will never ever have that ID upon them. So what's interesting is just how much the Conservatives here are modeling themselves on the Trump practices.
Look, John, it is a very, very small world, and with the internet, what happens, you know, in one community in the United States will be learned very quickly about, you know, throughout the UK and in fact, throughout the world. No question about that. And I will tell you, it really does disgust me that you have these right-wing Republicans who understand that very few people agree with their ideas. Very few Americans think that we should give tax breaks to the rich, or that we should throw people off of the health care that they have, or we should ignore climate. Very few people agree with that, but because they cannot debate their platform and their issues, their approach to winning elections is simply to make it harder for younger people, people of color, poorer people to vote. You know, you may say, well, an ID, what's the problem? I have a driver's license in my pocket. Well, you know what? A lot of people don't own cars. A lot of people are renting. A lot of people are transient. And if they can knock 5% of the voting, of people who would vote against them off of the voting lists, that is a huge success for them.
Can I take you to some of the international issues where we have joint concerns, obviously? In this country, as you know, under Tony Blair, he developed this concept of humanitarian intervention, and it became the justification for possibly the most inhumane international policy that we've seen, with, well, anything up to 1 million dying in the Middle East as a result of the Iraq war, the intervention into Afghanistan as well. Joe Biden's withdrawn from Afghanistan. I know he's received some criticism for that. But in this country, although despite there being criticism from the Conservatives and some of the military, etc., it gave us a bit of hope that actually America would prevent this concept of intervention across the world when we knew the motivations were largely not humanitarian, but actually they were either strategic. By strategic, I mean also but exploitative in terms of seeking to control some of the resources of the world, and in particularly oil in the Middle East. How strong is the feeling within the Democrat Party now in support of Biden in terms of withdrawal from Afghanistan, but also about resisting any further opportunities that some might press upon them for military interventions elsewhere in the globe?
By and large, the criticism of Biden with regard to Afghanistan is not withdrawing our troops. There's widespread support for that. The criticism was that the Biden administration did not perceive how quickly the corrupt Afghanistan government would collapse and give over military equipment to the Taliban and leave people in a position where they could not get out of the country. That was the criticism. So I think the American people, and this kind of goes across party lines, you know, Trump raised the issue as well. We are tired of endless wars. And the United States, we have been in Afghanistan for 20 years at a cost of, I don't know how many trillions of dollars, not to mention Iraq, not to mention the loss of life of American soldiers, the enormous loss of life and suffering of the people of Afghanistan and Iraq. So I think, look, this is a very tough issue because nobody that I know is a fan of the Taliban and the way, especially, they treat women and their authoritarianism. But I think we need to take a hard look at the proper role of military force around the world. And I think the conclusion that we reach is that what has happened since 9/11 in terms of the war on terror has largely been a failure. Massive, as you've indicated, massive loss of lives in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. We have lost soldiers, we have spent trillions of dollars. So how you fight to see that developing countries and countries all over the world move in the direction of democracy is enormously important. But I think it is fair to say that most Americans have concluded that the so-called war on terror is not the approach that we need in the future.
Thanks, Bernie. I want to bring in a few young people to ask you some questions. Is that okay?
That's fine.
The three young people I'd like to bring in, Abdullah and Sarah and Hope. And Abdullah, let me just say, Bernie, there are some heroes in our movement, and Abdullah is one of them because he's a member of Young Labour, which is being particularly targeted by the new leadership of the Labour Party to quieten down. And thank goodness Young Labour is not quietening down, they're speaking out.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. I'm a bit nervous now. Pressure's on. So yeah, hi Bernie, my name is Abdullah. So apart from Young Labour, I'm also the co-founder of Sheffield Black Lives Matter. So in 2020 and 2016, we had a huge impact in getting people out and protesting. We had over 5,000 people coming out. So yeah, that's been great. So just a question really. So myself and many other young people were galvanized to become active politically in recent years, particularly inspired by Jeremy and John's leadership, and also by yourself. But now it feels like we are limited and we are put into a small box, due mainly because of the leadership, Keir Starmer and his current leadership are limiting our political horizon and telling us that things that we are fighting for just can't be achieved. What can we do about this?
Thanks, Abdullah.
Abdullah, thank you for what you are doing, and let me thank all of the young people in the room, in the country, and around the world. You are the future of this planet. And I think it is an understatement to say that my generation, John's generation, has let you down. And it's not just on climate, it's on economics. In the United States, young people your age will likely, if we don't change it, have a lower standard of living than their parents. We're going in the wrong direction. Many young people are leaving school deeply, deeply in debt. Many young people are not able to get the jobs that they were educated to do. So I would say that what we in the progressive movement in the United States have accomplished is understanding that it is imperative, Abdullah, that we think big, not small. All right? There is no reason why in the UK, in the United States, all workers should not be able to earn decent wages and have decent benefits. There is no reason why all over the world we cannot provide quality health care to all human beings as a right of citizenship. There is no reason why together, if we stand together, and young people are leading this effort. Just yesterday, there were demonstrations all over the world, right here in Burlington, Vermont. Germany, I think, had hundreds of thousands of young people coming out. The future of the planet is at stake. How can you think small when the planet that you will face in 30 or 40 or 50 years may be increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable? And by transforming our energy system, we're going to create good paying, great jobs in so many different areas. The struggle, Abdullah, to my mind, is to understand that as human beings, we are entitled to certain rights. We are entitled to a decent standard of living, decent housing, decent educational opportunities, decent health care. These are not radical demands. We can do it, and your generation has got to lead the fight for that. We don't want to privatize healthcare in the UK. We want to do away with the privatization that exists here in the United States. Together, we can demand that the wealthiest people in the large corporations start paying their fair share of taxes and use that money to create the jobs, the educational opportunity that your people need and people here in the United States need. So those people who tell you you can't do it, you ask them why. Why can't you do it? Because you're afraid to stand up to big money interests? That's not an acceptable reason. So I urge your generation is going to have to lead the effort all over the world in fighting for a new world which is based on economic justice, social justice, racial justice, and importantly, environmental justice. We can do it with your leadership.
Sarah.
Thank you both so much for being here. My name's Sarah. I wanted to ask, so at the World Transformed, we're a grassroots political education project. And over the last 6 years, we've really tried to build a space where both those organising within the party and through electoral politics and those organising on the streets and in workplace can come together. And I'd love to understand how you see both of those forms of organising working together and how we can continue to create a movement where both those forms of organising can be maximised and we can create the change that we need to see.
Well, Sarah, thank you. I mean, one of the things that the progressive movement in the United States talks about, and it's based on historical reality, is that real change never ever takes place from the top on down, but it is always from the bottom on up. And there's a quote from Nelson Mandela, who says, they always say it is, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it exactly right, but something to the effect, they always say it is impossible until it is done. Always say it's impossible until it is done. In terms of education, it goes without saying that in a highly competitive global economy, an economy which is changing every day because of new technologies, we need your generation to be the best educated generation in the history of the world. And it is insane and just counterproductive to any economy to say to young people, oh, you can't afford to get a higher education or a graduate degree. Well, that's too bad, tough luck. No, we need you. How do you think we're going to deal with climate unless we come up with some great new ideas in terms of efficiently transforming our energy system? How do we deal with artificial intelligence to make sure that AI is working for people and not against workers? How do we come up with the scientific breakthroughs that we need to prolong human life? In my country, in the United States, there are parts of the United States where life expectancy is going down, not up. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough dentists. So we need the best educated workforce in the world. Any sane person in any economy understands that. So you have got to fight and tell your leadership that education is a human right, not just for young people, but for all people. Education is a human right, and fight to demand that that becomes governmental policy.
On radical ideas, you quoted Nelson Mandela. You knew Tony Benn as well, and he always used to say that when you come up with an idea, first they think you're mad, then they think you're bad, and then they say, well, it's their idea in the first place anyway. Hope.
Yep.
Hope.
Thanks, John. Hi, Bernie. This is all very exciting. For both the UK and the US left, I think it's fair to say that the last 5 years have been quite a steep learning curve in a lot of ways, where we've had kind of both defeats, but we've also had victories as well. So I wanted to ask, what do you feel are the kind of few biggest takeaways for our kind of transatlantic movement, in terms of both our successes and failures over the past 5 years? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, right now, as we are fighting to pass this transformative piece of legislation, Hope, we are taking on the entire ruling class of the United States of America. So what I hope the American people are learning, and by the way, we didn't, John raised the issue of corporate media, I think media in general, and that's an issue we have got to deal with. You know, Trump called the mainstream media in the United States fake news. That's wrong. It's not fake news. It's just that for a variety of reasons, they don't deal with the real issues impacting working people. That's at least my experience in the United States. So the failure, it's not even a failure. We are now taking on everybody. We're taking on the billionaire class. They don't want to pay more in taxes. We're taking on the healthcare industry. They don't want to expand public health. We're taking on the fossil fuel industry because they would prefer to destroy the planet and continue to make money. We're taking on the drug companies that charge us in the United States the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, far higher, by the way, than you pay. So we're taking them all on. We are coming forward with a people's agenda that is very, very popular. And the ruling class says, we cannot allow this to happen. If government begins to work for working people, they're going to get the crazy idea that democracy is a good thing, that it will work for them. Can't allow that to happen. They are spending tens of millions of dollars demonizing me and other people who are fighting for this change. That's the bad news. The bad news is that these people are very religious. Their religion is greed. It is greed, and they are prepared to destroy the planet in order to make a few dollars more. The good news is that we have gotten millions of Americans, especially young people, to ask why not? Why can't everybody have a decent job at decent pay? Why can't we have affordable housing? Why can't we have the best educational system in the world? Why not? Why can't we do this? And you think about all of the potential, the energy that is in your room right now, and it exists here all over the United States, young people especially, prepared to roll up their sleeves and be the doctors and the nurses and the construction workers and the teachers that we desperately need. So the lesson is that when you speak truth to people, they often respond in a positive way. And you're going to get beaten down. Oh, you can't do that. You're impractical. It doesn't work. It's going to be counterproductive. And the answer is when we stand together, and the fight here in the United States against Trumpism is to undo the damage he has done by trying to divide us up. But when we come together, black and white and Latino and Native American and Asian American and gay and straight and everybody else, we come together around a progressive agenda, put that agenda first and foremost, and ask the ruling class, why not? Why should not all young people have education and decent housing and all the other things that we need in society? Put them on the defensive. So, but thank you very much, Hope, for that question.
Bernie, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. There were three young people now are going to go down the pub and say, I've just been having a conversation with Bernie Sanders. And what you've done tonight is what you've been doing throughout your life, explaining the world, presenting a political analysis, of course, identifying a way forward that will attack those issues that confront us all, but also, above all else, inspired us. And I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I'd give you this welcome. Please visit us in the UK as soon as you can.
I
Bernie
surely will.
Sanders.
John, thank you so much.
I hope you thought that was worthwhile. I want just to repeat, the people who brought that together, The World Transformed, claimed the initiative, which was a project we launched last year about the development of ideas and policies during the COVID period, and also the Democracy Collaborative, Joe Guyon and that team that I've been working with in the States overall. And that was all done with hard voluntary efforts, people spending a lot of time, a lot of discussions taking place, and a lot of technical expertise. So I'd like you to put your hands together for all those people who did that. Can I also say this, just very briefly? At the moment, with Jeremy no longer leader, and with Keir Starmer taking over, it's tough. Now, some people I know have been quite critical at times. We just want to explain what we've been doing. When Starmer took over, when he won the election, it was a democracy. Jeremy and I took the view that we wouldn't support doing to him what they did to us, which was, some of you remember, every day, those personal attacks and abuse. I remember when Jeremy got elected, the day he was elected, we were in the QE2, and he was doing his speech to thank everyone for the support he got. And on the BBC, there was like a ticker tape going on of the names of the shadow cabinet resigning. I applauded both. But then after that, literally, people will write the story one day properly, but literally there was a coup every month. It wasn't just the chicken coup. There was a coup every month, virtually. We had to organise against, and we never had control of the NEC until 2 years on, basically, and it was tough. But we decided that we wouldn't do to Stalin what they did to us, because he was democratically elected. And that's required an awful lot of discipline, to be honest. And I'm usually the one, I tell people I went on the Jeremy Corbyn kindness and niceness course. And there are 12 steps, and I never got further than the 6th, but to be taken back again. But we've been disciplined about that. We've been disciplined about that all the way through, because we didn't want any excuse to be made that this was because the left are undermining Starmer or anything like that. It's not the left that are undermining Starmer. It's Starmer that's undermining Starmer. So, in this recent period, we've been able to be, I think, honestly, providing a critique of the mistakes and errors and what's been going on at the moment. But we've not done that in any personal attacks. We've done it on a political analysis of what's happening. And of course, the biggest challenge to us now is the erosion of democracy within our own party. We fought off the Electoral College, but I'm sure he'll come back with some proposals as well. They've increased the threshold in terms of nominating a leader for the leadership election, candidate for the leadership election. And also they've increased the threshold with regard to deselection of MPs and reselection overall. Of course, that's setbacks, but actually to have that victory around the Electoral College was quite significant. And that took a lot of work, and I want to thank all those people who organised around that as well. But the issue for us, I'll just say this, and it's the same for Bernie really, old enough have gone through some dark periods in the Labour Party. But the reality for me, and I just come back to it, I know some people will disagree, but under the first past the post system, there is no other way but of achieving some advance towards socialism other than through the Labour Party at the moment. And despite all the frustrations that there are, it's still the vehicle, I believe, for socialist advance in this country. But actually, the battle needs to be waged within the Labour Party now as best we can. And I just say to people who are fed up and they've left the party, etc., I understand their frustrations, and obviously you're still part of the movement, and whether you're in the Labour Party or outside the Labour Party, we'll work together as one big, large, progressive movement. But within the Labour Party, you can't win the fight unless you're in the fight. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to, it is about determination and courage now to stay in and fight in every way we possibly can. But also the interesting thing about this is that they seem to think they're winning the organisational struggle. But what's interesting is the bankruptcy of the right over the last 20 years ideologically means actually we are hegemonizing the political debate that goes on in this country from the left. And that's important, therefore, that we still continue to drive that into the Labour Party itself. And it is going to be tough. It is going to be tough. But waves happen. We had a wave, we got Jeremy Corbyn in it. It was a near miracle. And actually, the rosary beads were out at different times. It was a near miracle. That wave has slightly subsided. We now move to the next wave. And that will come. That will come because there's an objective reality out there of the economy and what's happening to our class. And this is always about class struggle. And that's what we've got to dedicate ourselves to. So in this conference, what we've got to do, of course, is mobilize as much as we can around the resolutions, the debates, etc., and around what electoral options that we've got. But the most important thing is, as we come out of conference, is that we get back into what we're good at, which is the mobilization on the ground of that struggle within our communities, within our unions, and through every progressive vehicle that we possibly can. Because in that way, we create a climate of opinion, we win the battle of ideas, and that will eventually result again in us winning the battle of the organisational struggle within the Labour Party. And I say, I'm a member of Unison. I've been a member of New People before it was Unison, etc. We've been controlled by a trade union bureaucracy, I'm careful about defamation, a self-fulfilling bureaucracy for a large number of years. And I thought, this union is dying on its feet. We're never going to break through. We've kept on working. We've just elected a radical left NEC in Unison that's taking control. And that will help us in the next wave of the struggle within the Labour Party itself. All I'm saying is that no matter how tough it is at the moment, there is always hope, but that hope becomes a reality through our determination, our courage, and our commitment. And that's what we need to show now. So thanks for coming tonight. I'm really grateful, and I hope you've helped work together. There's two final things. Two final things. I want to thank a few people as well. I want to thank our interpreters here. And there's a story, because these interpreters got fed up with what was going on within their sector, the way in which the people, organizations, agencies were starting to make profits and exploit people, etc. So they thought, F this, and they've set up a co-op. This is a co-op. And finally, our job is expressing and providing solidarity, both emotional but also material. There is a potential strike going to break out soon in Great Ormond Street Hospital. We have the workers at the back who will be at the door who are making a collection at the moment. We want to make sure that we give them every possible support we possibly can, both emotional and on the picket line, but also financial. So anything you can do to help to contribute would be great. Thanks. Cheers.